So I haven't done much in the way of speaking about ISSEY MIYAKE fragrances on the channel. I actually really enjoyed wearing L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme 25 years ago, one of my favorite citrusy fragrances. But beyond that, probably I spoke a little bit about Noir Ombre and maybe Encens, this one right here. But mostly I speak about L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme here and there on the channel. Never really did a lot of standalone videos, but when I got the chance to talk about it, I jumped at it because I want to discover and see what ISSEY MIYAKE our fragrances are all about today. So today I'm talking about L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme, the original from 30 years ago. We're talking about L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme Sport. We're talking about Nuit d'Issey, this one right here. And then finally, L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme Eau&Cedre. There is a special 20% off discount code over at Fragrance Buy if you use the code ISSEY20, but I'm going to break down these 4 fragrances all coming right up. Thanks so much for tuning in. It's Sebastian. We're talking about ISSEY MIYAKE fragrances today, and there is a buy one, get 20% off of the entire collection with code ISSEY20. So the fragrances are fairly inexpensive on Fragrance Buy as well, and for the next 48 hours, if you buy one, you get the next one at 20% off. So it's a really, really great deal because you can get a 200 ml bottle of, this is a 200 ml bottle right here, for $59, and of course if you buy 2 or one of the other and another, you get 20% off of the entire collection. So let's get started. But before I get started, I do want to say ISSEY MIYAKE's L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme was one of my favorite fragrances in the mid-90s. It was either L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme, Le Mail by Jean-Paul Gaultier, and Dolce & Gabbana pour Homme. Those are the 3 fragrances I wore from 95, 94, 95, 96. And then after that, 97, I discovered Amen, and I kind of decided I move on from all these fragrances and really, embrace Mugler's Amen. But ISSEY MIYAKE's L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme, what an amazing freshie, really robust and intense with its qualities, and it's very zingy, bitter, a bit green, but also very watery. So the original was created by Jacques Cavallier. So now I understand this guy's, technique for Louis Vuitton's fragrances. If you've ever explored Louis Vuitton's fragrances, because he creates Louis Vuitton's fragrances and he created L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme. It's a watery, aquatic Yuzu fragrance. So there's a watery element running throughout it. So if you've ever explored Louis Vuitton's fragrances, there's definitely a watery DNA running across it. So he, honed his technique here with this fragrance and then totally embraced it with the Louis Vuitton fragrances. See that? I mean, check them out if you ever explored the Louis Vuitton fragrances. But this, to me, is one of the best citrus fragrances ever created for men. And this is my own bottle. The other 3 fragrances I'm going to talk to you about were sent to me for this. And as I said, I jumped at the chance to talk about ISSEY MIYAKE because I haven't kept up with the brand. So this was launched in 94. Jacques Cavallier is the perfumer. He must have created this when he was quite young. And it's, again, 200 ml for $59 over at Fragrance Buy. I have it linked in the info box. Featuring notes of yuzu, lemon, tangerine, water lily, nutmeg, spices, sandalwood, vetiver, amber accord. So water lily is the note that we're looking for here. That is what gives it the aquatic edge. This is not a marine fragrance. It's not like smelling like the sea or the coast or fish or things like that. It just has a watery effect. It's actually called L'Eau d'Issey, water of Issey, ISSEY MIYAKE pour Homme, basically. So it's a watery fragrance, and that's what I was thinking. God, he actually created this fragrance utilizing that technique and basically, embraced it with the Louis Vuitton fragrance. Because for me, I have a lot of the Louis Vuitton fragrances, and a lot of them do have this kind of watery effect running throughout it, and you get that here quite a bit. But this is uber fresh. The yuzu or the grapefruit, because yuzu is a type of grapefruit, has a bit of saltiness in here. So there is that kind of salty effect happening, and perhaps it might come off a bit marine, more like sea salt kind of a thing. But lots of the yuzu with the lemons and tangerine, so it's quite citrusy and zingy and a bit green coming in there as well. There's a light green effect happening, but really great with that whole yuzu. I'm getting the skin of the yuzu plus the juiciness along with the tart sweetness of the lemons and the tangerines together. And it's that water lily that adds that watery effect, perhaps giving it a little bit of a floral edge to the fragrance, but not strong because water lilies do not have a very fragrant smell to me. And here It's just to enhance the citruses, to give it a little bit of that kind of floral edge, adding that watery touch. But there's spices here. There's that nutmeg, and it's a very interesting spice. It's also not very distinct. It doesn't take over. Like, let's say, for example, they use cinnamon in this. Totally would dominate, and it would not smell the same. But that nutmeg comes in, adds spice, but it doesn't like overwhelm. It does also say there's spices. I took the info from the ISSEY MIYAKE website. But again, they're very non-distinct spices. Perhaps some ginger in here, perhaps some cardamom in here. It's a very fresh fragrance, so they're going to be using fresh spices. The nutmeg to me is a warm spice, but again, it's very non-distinct. Then finally, the fragrance settles to the woods, the sandalwood, vetiver, and then the amber accord. But again, one of the best citrus fragrances. To me, it was one of my favorites in the mid-90s. If I did not want to wear the intensity of Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme or the vanillic lavendery touches of Le Male, this is what I would wear. But I do have to be honest, this is not as beastly as it once was. For me back then, the citruses were like alive. Right now, it's a bit muted. I think that's due to reformulations. But still, I think the quality is still there. I can pick up the day that I first bought it. I bought it at Macy's in San Francisco in 1995 or 94 is when I moved here. And I walked in and I got it and I was wearing it and really, really enjoying this fragrance, really, really loving it. But anyway, those are my thoughts for this one. It is very, very light right now, but for me, I think this is perfect for the summer heat. Just wear it in the summer heat, or when you want some uplifting boost, citrusy, sunshiny boost in the wintertime, I think it'll do that as well. But I think this particular fragrance totally comes alive when it's really, really warm outside. It just kind of blooms. The citrusy, tart, bitter, zinginess just comes alive here. But let me know if you're a fan of this one. Again, this is a really, really great offering from that house. I really enjoyed it, and I've featured it in various videos throughout the years on the channel. But I don't really, talk a lot about ISSEY MIYAKE. The fragrance that I have done a review of is l'Odyssée Pour Homme Noir Ambre. By the way, that was one of the better fragrances for this house as a designer fragrance, a really great amber. And then I've also spoken about Encens, l'Odyssée Pour Homme Encens. Between these two, they were Middle Eastern exclusives, I believe. My favorite was the Noir Ambre. And two other fragrances that I've worn throughout the years, Le Bleu d'Issey Pour Homme. I don't know if you guys remember this. And then one I've not worn too much of, but I bought and kept because it's such a great fragrance as a designer, Noir Argent. So let's move on to the three other fragrances I'm going to talk to you about. We're talking about ISSEY MIYAKE's l'Odyssée Pour Homme Sport from 2012, this one right here. So it launched in 2012, also created by Jacques Cavallier. This is like 4 years before he started creating Louis Vuitton's fragrances. And once again, we have a really great fragrance, kind of giving it a sporty edge, and also a bit of depth to the fragrance with leather. So this fragrance currently is either $32 for a 50 ml, and I believe this is a 50 ml, or 100 ml is $38. So quite inexpensive on the Fragrance Buy website. But this features notes of grapefruit, bergamot, vetiver, cedar wood, leather, and nutmeg. Not much more than what is in the other fragrance, but you have the addition of the leather in here. So I would be honest, the leather does show up, but it's mostly in the dry down and on its way out rather than when you first spritz it. For me, up top, it's all about the grapefruit and the bergamot. It's quite juicy once again, and it's a sport fragrance, so you don't want something really uber intense. And then eventually it gets deeper with the vetiver, the cedar, and the leather, and then the warm, light spice of the nutmeg comes in again. In the end, it's very citrusy, it's spicy and fresh, and for sure there's lots of woods here. It's got some aromatic elements, and then of course earthy. But I do get that aquatic touch in here that I get in the original l'Odyssée as well. I get it in here. There's definitely something watery, aquatic running throughout it, but not marine once again. It's not marine. These are not marine fragrances unless they have made of marine type flanker, which I have bought some of their summer flankers in the past. Can't remember them now. This was years ago, many years ago. But this to me is also really great, just like the original. And it's a bit more modern in comparison to the original. But for me, the original is still very modern. It doesn't smell dated. It smells really, really great. But if you're looking for something with a little more intensity, a little more depth, And I feel like the leather personally does add a little depth in this fragrance. You should get it. But again, the leather is not super potent, so don't expect that this is a leather fragrance. It's just a very nicely made sporty fragrance. The only other thing with these 4 fragrances I'm talking about, they're all eau de toilette, so they don't have the best longevity, but they're also very, like they're not very expensive, so they're very inexpensive for you to have laying around. They smell great. These first 2 fragrances are my 2 favorites, the original and the sport, both created by Jacques Cavallier. Then we've got something deeper and richer, but once again still an eau de toilette. It's ISSEY Miyake's Nuit d'ISSEY, this one right here. So this is created by Dominique Ropion along with Loc Dong. I believe Loc Dong used to work at IFF. He's no longer there. I think he moved to another firm. But it's a co-creation between the 2 perfumers in 2014, and currently on their website, the Fragrance Buy website, 75 ml is $40, 125 ml is $51. This features notes of leather, woods, incense, spices, black pepper, ebony, tonka, vetiver, grapefruit, bergamot, and patchouli. So this is completely different fragrance. It's not L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme, it's Nuit d'Issey, it's darker, it says Nuit. It's nighttime, so it's more of a nighttime going out kind of fragrance, but unfortunately it was not my favorite between the other 2. But I prefer it compared to the last one I'm going to talk to you about. There is that. So it's quite leathery and woody and smoky at the same time, and then the spices come in. But in addition to the spices, getting spices like cardamom, perhaps a little nutmeg once again, maybe a little bit of ginger, but nothing like cloves or cinnamon. This is not that kind of warm, spicy. More like a bit more non-distinct kind of spices, the cardamom, ginger, and then of course the nutmeg. But there's also lots of black pepper in here, quite a bit. It's very much black peppery, very intense. And then of course, you know, it does start off a bit fresh when you're spritzing it. I guess that kind of trademark grapefruit citrus kind of combo is up top, but for me, it goes right to the woods and the spices. And then eventually the leather, the smoky incense and things like that. And of course, drying down, it goes to a patchouli. I'm honestly, this is not my favorite kind of fragrance from this house. I much prefer what the brand is known about. The L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme. And then of course the sport. Both of those are really, really great. I like its fresh vibrancy. This one, unfortunately, again, not a favorite fragrance of one, but I'm sure there's a market for this one. It's interesting also, I mentioned earlier, this Noir Argent is quite nice. It's a Nuit d'Issey flanker Noir Argent. Once again, created by Dominique Ropion. It's a really, really great fragrance. If you guys can get your nose on this, I'm not going to compare it now. I believe it's discontinued. It's a really, really great flanker. That's why I've kept it unused. But the original Nuit d'Issey, for me, it's a bit boring, sadly. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Nuit d'Issey by ISSEY MIYAKE. Let me know if you're a fan of that fragrance or the previous fragrances, the original L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme or L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme Sport. I think those 2 are great. But again, very fresh fragrances, eau de toilette concentrations. And then finally, last but not least, it's L'Eau d'Issey pour Homme Eau&Cedre, this one right here. Unfortunately, this goes marine. There's a note in here that is not my favorite note. It's cologne, and I'm very sensitive to this note, and it does show up. But this is a 2022 launch. It was Marie Salamagne that created it, a perfumer that does all of the fragrances for Atelier des Ors. Are you familiar with that house? I do enjoy her work there, but I'm not enjoying the work here. It's 100 ml for 42 or 50 ml for 34. So again, once again, very inexpensive for these designer fragrances. And if you buy 2, you get 20% off, 2 or more. So this features notes of cardamom, cedarwood, vetiver, cologne, and patchouli. It's that magic word, cologne. I stay away from this note. Sadly, I didn't know it was here. And they've added the cologne note in here to give it that watery effect that the original has. But to me, it goes marine because cologne is to recreate the smell of the sea. So that's why this one kind of falls apart for me. But in the end, it's basically lots of woods and cardamom, which is the spice. Cedarwood, vetiver is, you know, woody notes. Even patchouli has that kind of woody characteristic. But that cologne ruins it for me, sadly. I mean, it's not overly strong. It doesn't smell like you're swimming in fish, but it's there. It's mostly a woody fragrance with some spice. It's a bit boring, I would say. Not my kind of fragrance. I much prefer the citruses and the citrusy fragrances. They left the citruses off on this one, and they went into the woody direction. But those are my thoughts on this one. It's very fresh, but also aromatic, but it's very, very woody. And then that marine aquatic thing comes through. that ruins it. But let me know your thoughts on this particular fragrance, l'Odyssée pour Homme Eau&Cedre. I know there's a lot of other flankers. These 3 smaller bottles were sent to me, and again, I got the opportunity to do this video, and I jumped at it because I wanted to discover what else ISSEY MIYAKE has. Still, this is to this day a really great smelling designer fragrance. Sure, it has gotten weaker, it's gotten watered down, unfortunately, but like I said, in the summertime and the heat, it's perfection. It'll come alive, and that zingy, spicy grapefruit note in there really will freshen you up in the summertime. Anyway, those are my thoughts on these 4 ISSEY MIYAKE fragrances. Don't forget the discount code. It's in the info box. If you buy 2 or more, 20% off the total of these ISSEY MIYAKE fragrances. And I noticed that on Fragrance Buy, there's a ton of different flankers there, so you can have a fun time going through the website. But let me know your thoughts on these fragrances. Do you have them? Do you enjoy them? Are you a fan of the original? When did you start wearing this one? Again, I started wearing it around 94, 95 when it first launched, but let me know when you discovered it, because I know it's a very popular fragrance. And one last thing I didn't mention, I absolutely love the matte frosted kind of finish on the bottle. I love that about that bottle. It was really great until 2 or 3 years later when Aquatic came out with that same kind of matte finish bottle. That was my favorite bottle. But anyway, also let me know, did you ever discover Noir Ombre and or Incense, these 2 fragrances? And then this one, which I know I have a kind of a broken bottle, but I still have the bottle. It's l'Odyssée pour Homme. It was a really great fragrance. Sadly, I don't have it anymore. Anyway, thanks so much for watching today. If you have any questions or comments, please list below. Please like this video. Please share it. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Have a good one. Goodbye.